Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will talk about the HOA that wants to evict me from my property. I was midway through skimming leaves off my pool when a man in a charcoal suit stepped through my open side gate like he owned the oxygen on my property. He didn't say hello. He lifted a heavy folder, cracked it open like a book of spells and announced, "As of today, you are evicted for failure to comply with community amenity scheduling." I stared at him. A dragonfly buzzed between us, then thought better of it and climbed higher into the blue. "Evicted from my own house?" I said, letting the skimmer drip on the concrete. "For not letting strangers in swimsuits splash around in my backyard?" He did a little chin point at the deep end, as if the water itself were guilty. "It's the association's reserved pool time," he said. "You're obstructing. Denying access after being given the schedule is a breach of covenants. The board authorized me to..." I held up a hand. "Stop, there's no board here. I'm not in any association. This is a private home." He smiled in a way that showed a lot of teeth, but none of the niceness. "I'm Coulter. I run the management side for the community 2 streets over. You bought from the old parcel that borders our development. Our directors want amenity continuity." Amenity continuity. I almost laughed. He was serious. He had a legal pad. Behind him, 2 people in matching polo shirts held clipboards and looked like they both wanted my hose to go rogue and spray them so they could call their supervisor and complain. "I don't need your director's wishes," I said. "I have a deed." "You have a deed with covenants," he said, sliding a paper toward me on a sleek little clipboard with a pen attached by a ball chain, like I was about to sign for a package. "Your property sits inside the declared master plan footprint, and we're regularizing amenities. We posted a schedule last week. Tuesday and Friday evenings are open swim for dues-paying residents." He pointed behind me, and I followed his finger to the far fence. Someone had taped a laminated sheet to my fence post while I was at work. I'd assumed it was a flyer for gutter cleaning or a yard service. It was a neat little chart with pastel blocks of time and words like family night and lap swim. My pool. Their schedule. "You taped this to my fence," I said. "After notice," he said smoothly. "We also made a courtesy announcement at the welcome gazebo." "I don't have a welcome gazebo," I said. He blinked at me in a way that made it clear he believed things like gazebos were universal constants, like sunrise. "It's in the common green," he said. "I'm giving you a chance to avoid penalties. If we can avoid the eviction, I'd prefer it. Let's keep it friendly." A woman with a scratch pad at his shoulder chimed in. "If you need a lifeguard, we can suggest names." I looked past them at the gate and thought about the lock I had installed when I moved in. A wide, old-fashioned hasp with a padlock big enough to anchor a canoe. I had inherited this place from an aunt who'd spent her final years rewriting little bits of the garden to suit her exact taste. And I had added the lock because I liked my evenings quiet. I liked floating silently, counting the crickets. I didn't want a dozen splash-happy people wandering through my yard on Tuesdays because a committee liked the idea. "You can suggest all the names you want," I said. "Nobody is using my pool. It's not a community amenity. It's a hole in the ground for which the county charged me a stupid permit fee. If you think you can evict me, call an officer and we'll all have a laugh." He didn't call an officer, he called a locksmith. He also called someone with a phone gimbal who started panning slowly across my fence, my shed, my herb planters, narrating under her breath about documenting access obstruction, while the locksmith, a fast-moving guy with a rolling bag of shiny picks, knelt beside my side gate lock. Coulter pulled out a printed notice with a gold seal sticker like it had graduated from something. My neighbor Marnie stepped out onto her back porch with a mug and a frown. She had hearing like a deer. "What's going on?" she called over the fence. "Eviction day," the woman with the gimbal said cheerfully, like she was announcing a bake sale. Marnie set down her mug hard enough to make a clink. "Over a pool? It's part of the community, ma'am," the woman said. Marnie looked at me. "Since when are we part of anything?" "We're not," I said. And then I dialed the non-emergency police number. I've only dialed 911 once in my life after an accident on the highway. This wasn't an emergency exactly, but it was ridiculous enough to deserve someone with a badge. The dispatcher got the basics and sent a patrol car. The locksmith continued. Coulter crossed his arms. The gimbal woman narrated. The Polo twins took photos of the laminated schedule like it was a sacred relic. It was all surreal. The dragonfly came back, skimmed the water, and again changed its mind about whatever it had planned to do. When the officer arrived, he looked like exactly the sort of officer you hope shows up when people start doing things they shouldn't. Patient eyes, a tidy notebook, a posture that said he was willing to stand there until the end of time if that's what it took to settle an argument without handcuffs. "What's the issue?" he asked. I gestured. "These people came into my yard and tried to change my locks because I didn't let them in my pool. They say they're evicting me. Do you have ID, ma'am?" he asked, gentle. I handed it over, plus a copy of my deed that I keep in a thick folder in the kitchen. I also waved at the laminated schedule. "That's not a thing." Coulter handed the officer the piece of paper with the gold sticker. "We have rules about community access. She's not a dues-paying resident, but her parcel falls within our master plan. We've consolidated amenities for fairness. She refused to open. We gave notice. She's obstructing. The board authorized eviction. I am the authorized representative." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You're evicting her from her house for not sharing her pool?" "And for rejecting the schedule," said the woman with the gimbal. The officer took his time reading Coulter's paper. Then he flipped a few pages into my deed and the plat map. "What's your association called?" he asked. Coulter said its name. It was one of those aspirational phrases that sounds like a bottled water brand. The officer nodded slightly and then scanned my plat again. "I'm not seeing any covenants recorded on this parcel," he said. "And this isn't an eviction. Evictions require a court order. The sheriff enforces those. You can't show up with a locksmith and a camera and evict someone from a property they own. It's under our umbrella," Coulter said tightly. "There's an implied easement for amenities. Implied easements don't work like that," the officer said, like he'd had a cousin or a neighbor get burned by a driveway dispute at some point. He turned to the locksmith. "Sir, step away from the lock. If you keep working, I'll be writing a report with your name in it for attempted criminal mischief." The locksmith frowned at Coulter. "I was told this was authorized." "It isn't," the officer said. "Ma'am," he said to me, "consider posting your property clearly and keeping that gate closed. If they trespass, call us." Coulter set his jaw and tried again, tone slightly more careful. "Officer, we have a schedule. We posted it. Posting something on someone else's fence doesn't create rights," the officer said. "Take it down and leave her alone unless you have a court order. And even then, you call the sheriff. You don't do it yourself." That should have been the end of it. They should have gone away, or at least retreated to regroup. Instead, Coulter nodded like he was filing some mental paperwork titled Plan B, Be Worse. He took back his gold-sealed notice, tucked it neatly into his folder, and told the gimbal woman to stop filming. Then he looked straight at me and said, "You've made this adversarial. We tried to be friendly," Marnie snorted. "You tried to steal a pool." They left. The officer gave me a business card and told me to call if they returned. I walked along the fence, peeled off their laminated schedule, and set it on the patio table like a trophy I wasn't proud of. That night, I dug through every document from my closing: the deed, the title insurance policy, the survey, the old permit for the pool construction, the property tax history. My aunt had owned the house since before the nearby houses existed. The development with the cute mail kiosks and matching mailboxes and the tiny dog park came later, built by a company I'll just call the developer. They may have had a master plan with amenities, but my lot was carved out long before, and my deed had no mention of any homeowner association. I was as independent as a house could be inside city limits. I called a friend from college, Leah, who had become a real estate attorney. I sent her PDFs. She called me back in under an hour. "You're not in any HOA," she said. "There's not even a recorded annexation clause on your parcel. You are a separate subdivision on a separate plat. If they try to record any liens or restrictions, you let me know immediately because that's a big no." "Can they do some kind of implied thing?" I asked. "Not like that," Leah said. "Easements arise because of access needs or because someone granted permission historically, not because someone wishes your pool were an amenity. Also, operating a public pool requires permits. If they advertise your pool as a community feature, they may be violating county health codes. Keep everything they give you." The next day, a typed letter arrived in my mailbox from the management company. The return address was a suite in a low building near a highway. The letter said I needed to remit assessment fees for amenity maintenance, and that failure to cooperate with the schedule would result in sanctions, liens, and referral to eviction. I recognized all the important-sounding words and none of the legal authority. I took the letter to the police station and to the county clerk's office and asked if any liens had been recorded. None had been. The clerk, a woman who had worked there long enough to wear her reading glasses on a ribbon, pointed at the line on my deed where it said, "Without conditions, covenants, or restrictions," and nodded. "Sometimes new boards get excited," she said. "It happens when a development grows fast. They think they're City Hall. Keep records." On Friday evening, at the time labeled Family Open Swim on the pastel schedule, 6 kids and 4 adults showed up at my gate, beach towels draped around their necks like capes. The adults were smiling in that anxious, eager way of people who want to comply with authority and also have a good time. One of the dads called over the fence, "Hey, is it open? We got the notice." "It's not a community pool," I said. "I know you got a schedule, but it's wrong." "I'm sorry. I can't let you in." A mom pointed at her phone. "It says here there's a lifeguard on duty." "I'm the only one on duty," I said. "And I'm going to watch a movie indoors with the volume too loud because I had a week." They were polite. They were disappointed. They left. 10 minutes later, Coulter returned with a man I recognized from a meeting about speed bumps last year. A person who liked to use phrases like common sense and consensus. The speed bump guy, who introduced himself this time as acting president, carried a canvas bag of laminated badges on lanyards, like he was ready to staff a big box store. "We're going to need to speak with you," he said, like we were in a conference room. "I'm going to need you to step away from my gate," I said. "This isn't a club. You're making this very hard," he said. "We are trying to do something good for the families." "So am I," I said, thinking of Marnie's granddaughter who liked to draw on my patio with chalk. "I keep dangerous strangers out of a fenced yard with a deep body of water. That's the good thing I'm doing. I'm also following the law. Eviction requires a court order and the sheriff does that. You can't evict me with a tote bag of lanyards." He looked like he wanted to argue about something else, but I had already pulled out my phone. I didn't threaten. I simply held it so he could see the police department's number on the screen, then let my thumb hover. He made that mouth-shut decision people make when they realize they might be the person in the scene who ends up with a problem if a uniformed adult appears. "We'll see you in court," he said stiffly. "Fantastic," I said. "Please bring your schedule. I'm going to frame it." Over the weekend, I installed 2 new cameras and set them to notify me if the gate moved so much as a millimeter. I also wrote a sign. It said, "Private property, not an HOA amenity, no trespassing, deliveries okay, friends welcome." I posted it where their laminated schedule had been. I texted a photo of the sign to Leah, who texted back, "Good. Consider a mailbox camera too. If they mess with your mail, that's a serious problem." Monday morning, I went to the county's environmental health office with a printout of the schedule and the letter. I asked to speak with whoever knew about pools. A man with a gentle voice and a binder explained that residential pools are exempt from the public pool requirements, but only if they're truly private. "Advertising a community pool requires a permit, inspections, trained staff," he said, flipping through regulations. "If an association is telling people a pool is an amenity, they need to comply with public pool standards. I don't think they can assign a private pool into that category." "What if they just tape a schedule to the fence and hope?" I asked. He smiled in a way that said he had seen worse. "If they're scheduling access for members, that's not private use. If you give me something in writing showing that, we can send a warning letter." I gave him copies. He made notes. I walked out with the weird feeling of gratitude you get when a person with a binder and a quiet tone tells you a rule applies to your side for once. That evening, someone flew a drone over my backyard. It hovered, nose down like a curious gull, and then tried very obviously to take a better look at my pool, my deck, and my face. I waved. It rose, zipped sideways, and disappeared. I made a note and added a line to my camera setup. "If drone detected near pool, send push alert." The next letter from the management company wasn't as calm as the first. It used phrases like failure to cooperate and escalating penalties. It also said they had voted to place a lien on my house for unpaid assessments. I brought the letter to Leah. She read it twice, then put it down carefully like it might stain her desk. "If they record a lien, it's fraudulent," she said. "Mail me scans of the envelope with the postmark, and if they have a digital signature anywhere, capture it." She paused. "I'm going to send them a letter with case law citations they won't like." Tuesday evening, which had been labeled lap swim on the pastel schedule, I heard the side gate clang. I checked the camera. The acting president had a bolt cutter. He put it on the lock and pressed. I stepped to the patio, pointed at my phone, and said, "That's a felony if you cut that. Please step back." He froze and the bolt cutter sagged. Then he tried to recover by talking fast. "We just need to maintain the water quality for the community." "It's a salt system," I said. "The community is me and a rosemary bush." He looked like he wanted to throw the bolt cutter into the bushes. Instead, he set it down in slow motion, as if a safe way to avoid admitting wrong was to put the tool gently on the cement and walk away from it as if he had never fully committed to using it. He left without another word, carrying his bolt cutter like a toddler carries a toy he knows he's not allowed to bring to the table. On Thursday, the letter from the county environmental health office went out. I didn't know this when it happened, but I felt the effect. Suddenly, the management company's tone shifted. Instead of bluster about eviction, they started hissing about miscommunication and asking for a discussion to regularize our understanding. It felt like the moment in a storm when the pressure drops and you sense the wind wants to change. I agreed to meet, but at a coffee place near the city library, on neutral ground with cameras, witnesses, and excellent muffins. I brought Leah on a video call. They brought Coulter and the acting president, and a woman with a very crisp blouse who took notes on a tablet with a stylus that clicked like a tiny metronome. Coulter opened by suggesting we find a compromise. "We don't want to fight," he said. "We'd like to license certain hours. We can even include a stipend for maintenance." Leah's rectangle on my phone stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "My client's private residential pool is not licensable to an association without her consent, and any attempt to treat it as a public amenity subjects your client to county pool regulations, for which they are not currently authorized, per the letter you received. Furthermore, any further threats of eviction will be treated as harassment. If you record a lien, we'll file a slander of title action and seek damages." The acting president tried a different angle. "We're neighbors," he said. "This is supposed to be friendly. Friends don't hire locksmiths," I said. "Friends bring muffins." I slid a bag across the table. I had brought muffins. I am not a monster. We each ate a blueberry one. There was a long pause during which I could feel the crisp-bloused note-taker reevaluating life choices. "We can agree to remove the schedule from the fence," Coulter said. "We can agree not to send families to your gate. But you need to stop contacting the county. It makes us look uncoordinated." "That's because you are," Leah said. "And you will not be turning this back around as if my client did something wrong. Send her a letter explicitly withdrawing all assertions about amenity access, referring to her as not being part of your association, and we'll consider the matter resolved for now. But any false filings, liens, fines, or notices will be met with litigation." They left unhappy, but they left. 2 days later, I got a short letter in which they clarified that they had mistakenly included a private parcel in their amenity scheduling, and that I was not subject to their rules. They CC'd the county office, which made me almost as happy as a quiet night in my pool. I took a breath and then I took another. I swam slow laps under the porch light. Dragonflies came back. The rosemary bush smelled like a good roasted chicken would smell if it were a plant. And then, because apparently we live in a world where people cannot resist doubling down, they sent me a notice that I was still in arrears for assessments previously levied. The total was a number that could buy a very decent used couch. If I didn't pay, they said, they would refer me to legal. The letter arrived taped to my front door because someone had opened my mailbox and seen I had a camera. I watched the tape go up on my app, time-stamped at 2:12 a.m., and I watched the shoes of the person who did it. Expensive sneakers, scuffed at the toe. Coulter wore those shoes. I made another appointment with the county clerk. No lien had been recorded yet. I went to the police with the video of my door getting a midnight tape job. A different officer, this one young enough to look like he had recently made peace with the notion that every problem in the world was going to be delivered to his shift, watched it and said, "We'll add it to the harassment report." "Is it illegal to tape a letter to my door?" I asked. "Not necessarily," he said, "but the pattern matters." The pattern did matter. In the next week, a drone came by twice. Someone rattled my side gate after midnight and ran when the light popped on. The acting president stood on the sidewalk and read a resolution into his phone about reclaiming amenities and designating the pool as common benefit until legal status is determined. I kept calling the non-emergency line. Officers kept coming, making notes, reminding them that a court order would be needed for any action. I kept wondering what made people so confident they could manufacture authority out of vibes. I found out on a Wednesday when I saw a flyer posted near the mail kiosk at the edge of their development. Community update meeting, with special announcement about expanded amenities. It had a photo of a smiling family by a pool that wasn't mine, taken from a stock photo site because I recognized the watermark. Barely cropped out. I went. I stood in the back. They used words like harmonization and shared benefit. They did not say they had not actually legally added anything to their list of perks. They said it like it had already been done. After the meeting, while people carried out folding chairs and someone in a t-shirt collected a donation jar, I approached the board table. "You can't expand amenities by lying about them," I said. "We're not lying," the acting president said. "We're pursuing legal remedies." "Which?" I asked. He straightened. "We're going to court." "Good," I said. "Me too." The next morning, a process server knocked on my door and handed me a sheaf of papers heavier than my cat. The association had filed a complaint in civil court seeking declaratory judgment that my property was subject to their CC and Rs. They wanted the court to say they could use my pool. They also sought a temporary injunction forcing me to comply with the schedule while the lawsuit was pending. I texted Leah. She replied immediately. "They filed? Perfect. We'll countersue for harassment, trespass, attempted slander of title, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We'll also ask for a preliminary injunction against them. Save every scrap of paper." That night, someone, or a very ambitious gust of wind, pushed my side gate just enough that the latch rattled. I watched the video again. Not wind. A hand. The next morning, my rosemary bush was snapped off at the base. I stood staring at the broken stalk as if it could tell me who had pushed it over. It smelled like hope, and like soup, and like anger. I didn't call the police that time. I called a fence company. "Biggest privacy slats you've got," I said. The installer, a man named Jansen with arms like small oak trees and a soft voice, put me on the schedule for the following week. "Thicker than the usual," he said. "You want a lock that could stop a truck? We have one called the Bear." "2 bears," I said, "one for each gate." While I waited for Jansen, Marnie brought over a gift. A little solar-powered buzzer she used for her back gate when her grandkids were little. "It's loud," she said. "It sounds like a shopping cart squeal. Put it where it'll make people regret their life choices." I did. I also went to the city's permitting office and asked about signs, cameras, and fences. The clerk printed me a sheet of rules and highlighted the lines that mattered. I could put up cameras as long as they didn't point into other people's windows. I could post no trespassing signs. I could build a fence to a certain height. I left feeling like a person who had studied for a test and found out I already knew the chapters. When the first hearing rolled around, a quick date in front of a judge to decide whether anyone should be doing anything while the lawsuit ground along, I wore a navy dress and brought a stack of documents in a plain folder. Coulter wore a suit and a tie that I wouldn't have chosen, and the acting president wore that canvas bag of lanyards slung over his shoulder as though it were a credential. Their attorney was the crisp-bloused woman with the tablet. Leah wore competence like a well-fitting jacket. The judge listened. He asked brief questions. He looked at the plat maps. He looked at the county letter. He looked at the laminated schedule, which I had brought like a prop in a school debate. He did not look at their gimbal footage, even though they offered, presumably because watching me skim leaves off my pool was not going to solve any legal problems. Then the judge said, with the kind of patience that carries a tiny thread of scolding, "You can't impose covenants retroactively on a parcel not subject to them. You can't evict someone without a court order, and even then the sheriff does that. You will not set foot on her property or send anyone else there. You will not advertise her pool as a community amenity. If you recorded any lien, you will remove it. This order stands until this case is resolved." He signed a paper. The court clerk stamped it. The crisp-bloused attorney swallowed and said, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice that sounded like swallowing a square ice cube. Outside the courtroom, they tried to pivot back to being neighborly. "Look," the acting president said, "how about we reset?" "I'm rooting for your reset," I said, "but it's going to happen very far away from my gate." I went home, set the court order on my kitchen table where I could see it, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. 2 mornings later, at 6:12 a.m., my camera pinged. The side gate moved. The shopping cart squeal went off. I stood up so fast that the chair screeched and ran to the window. A man was at my lock with a slender tool, and though I couldn't see his face, I knew the shoes. The bear lock held. He jiggled, swore, quietly, but it was the kind of hiss you hear from someone who thinks they're alone, and stepped back. He saw the little red dot of the camera. He flipped it off in a gesture that technically contained no vulgarity but communicated the general spirit. Then he left. In the camera's reflection on the window glass, I saw my own face, white with anger. I printed a still from the security video, stapled it to the judge's order, and mailed the packet to the management company's attorney with a note. "Please remind your client what a do not set foot means." Leah, my attorney, also filed a request for sanctions if the harassment continued. 3 days later, yellow flyers were everywhere. "Open swim night, bring the kids." No address, just a map dot near my fence. From my window, I watched families wander over, stop at my locked gate, and drift away looking embarrassed. One woman glanced up and mouthed, "Sorry, I called the county." The county called the association. A stronger letter about public pool rules went out that afternoon. That evening, a notice of compliance inspection slid under my gate. Association letterhead, invented titles, and a demand to access our amenity. I taped it to the fridge and scribbled myself a reminder to bake brownies for the officers, because this was going to need a report. On inspection day, Coulter arrived with 2 neon-vested men and a thick clipboard. He reached for my gate. The bear lock refused. My alarm squealed. Officers rolled up, read the court order, examined the pretend notice, and asked, "Let's see your badge, Chief Operations." The vests had contractor logos, not badges. Names were taken, trespass citations written. Coulter lingered long enough to posture, then left when even his shoes couldn't sell authority. After they drove off, I sat by the pool and waited for my pulse to fall. My rosemary bush had been snapped off. The air still smelled faintly of sunscreen. The next morning, a packet from the legal department arrived with a notice of pending lien. I drove to the clerk. It wasn't recorded, just stamped "received, not filed." "We reject liens with no judgment and no CC&Rs, the clerk said. I promised brownies. She smiled without looking up from her screen, the expression of someone who deletes nonsense for a living. Rumors carried the next chapter. Dues hikes pinned on legal costs, a noisy board meeting, and a treasurer asking why homeowners were paying to fight someone who wasn't even in their association. I swam slow, reread the injunction, and made a list called Things I Control: skimmer, cameras, locks, muffins, friends, attorney, sleep. At 9:04 a.m. on Tuesday, Coulter tried to evict me again. He returned with 2 community patrol guards and a gold-sealed "Notice to Vacate. We're here to take possession," one said, voice lowered like he was in a movie. I held up the judge's order. Officers arrived, opened citation books, and told Coulter he was flirting with contempt. The guards apologized and left. That night I slept with the window open. Saying the pool was mine out loud changed me. Marnie brought watermelon in solidarity. I emailed the county, city code, and the state consumer office with copies of the seal letter and the guard clip. Marnie's son set up a legal drone detector that logs IDs. Later, the same ID appeared over the sales office down the street. Leah countersued and added abuse of process. Then a package with no return address landed on my porch. Emails and screenshots under a sticky note. "You didn't hear this from me. I'm tired. R." The documents showed plans to annex by practice, flyers to build expectation, and a brochure draft with a photo of my deck and my aunt's copper wind chime under "Pool Nights Every Tuesday." Leah said we'd subpoena originals. The facts were enough. Depositions followed. Leah asked tight questions. Did Coulter authorize open swim, community engagement? The locksmith, maintenance assistants, a notice to vacate without a court order, provided information. Why tape a schedule to my fence? I believed in amenity continuity. The acting president was blunter. We thought it would work. While we sat in conference rooms, the county issued an enforcement letter. Stop advertising any private pool as an amenity or face penalties. The state licensing office opened a case for unlicensed activity and deceptive practices. In court, the judge asked 2 questions. Was my parcel subject to their documents? No. Did they try to enforce anyway? Yes. He issued a permanent injunction. No entry, no contact except through counsel, no advertising my yard, no assessments. He referred the contempt issue to the sheriff and copied the licensing board. Homeowners revolted. A recall removed the board. New volunteers, Dan the teacher, the skeptical treasurer, and the Lantern Walk organizer, announced a forensic review. They terminated the management company for material breach and demanded reimbursement of the legal fees pushed onto homeowners. The state suspended the company's registration for a year, fined it, and ordered ethics training. The sheriff placed the bolt cutter president in a diversion program. Our damages hearing produced fees, costs, and a tidy award that paid Leah and funded peace of mind. I spent part of the check on quiet, a higher fence, an interior gate, and a trellis where my aunt had wanted honeysuckle. I rehung the wind chime. The first note rang clean. The new board banned drones over non-common property. The buzzing stopped. We retired the polite sky sign. R turned out to be the bookkeeper who'd been told to code event labor and fuel on my open swim nights. She resigned under the new board's protection and now visits with lemonade and goat stories. Unexpected medicine for a month of nonsense. The community patrol company mailed an apology, said they'd been misled, and included a coffee card. I spent it on muffins for the clerk who stamped "received" instead of "recorded." Cinnamon, like my aunt used to say, let them smell it while you fight. Parents who'd once lined up with towels stopped by to apologize. One child gave me a drawing of a blue rectangle and a smiling stick figure and said she was taking lessons at the city pool. Permits, lifeguards, the right order. Marnie and I hosted a small thank you. Officers, the county binder guy, the neighbor who sent screenshots, Leah's team, Jansen's crew, and the bookkeeper. We read the injunction like a souvenir, watched dragonflies skitter over the water, and let calm settle. I mounted a small sign by the gate. Welcome, invited friends. Be kind to the water and to each other. Later, a man in a charcoal suit walked past without stopping. I didn't wave. The victory wasn't about him anymore. I kept the laminated schedule to remember that shine isn't law. If you're tempted to flex borrowed power, treat it like a dish. Use gently, return clean. Otherwise, it's a paper plate in the rain. The new board opens meetings with 5-minute lessons, a clerk on recording statutes, a deputy on warrants, a librarian on spotting junk flyers. I spoke once with filming banned and the word amenities exiled. I told the slice where the officer said, "The sheriff does that." The judge said, "You can't." And I planted 2 rosemary for everyone they broke. Spring returned. I opened the pool, checked the salt, walked the fence, thanked my aunt out loud, and tossed rosemary like confetti. The bear lock clicks. Drones are gone. Kids ride by and wave because the boundary is clear. There's a chair on my patio I call the lesson chair. Most days the lesson is breathe. Some days it's call Leah. Once it was you can rebuild rosemary. The last thing on the fence is a brass plaque near the hinge. Private, not because I'm stingy, but because it's mine. When people ask what I did when the association sent their boss to evict me for refusing their schedule, I say, I planted rosemary, installed better locks, learned drone logs, baked muffins, called people whose signatures matter, and said no until it stuck. Their mistake was big, my rights were bigger. The house is mine. The pool is mine. The future is quiet, the kind you earn. Friends, thank you. See you soon.